If you look over the last 12 months, Europe has consistently shown us some incredible performances in both domestic and international tournaments, but that has never truly translated into success when it matters, and the Middle East and North Africa have only really managed to find their feet again within the last few months, thanks in large part to one team. So can any of the 5 teams from Europe and MENA step up to the plate and claim the crown of world champion in Boston? Let's begin with a team that topped the global standings points for 2024, BDS. Arguably the most consistent team throughout Europe, even with 2 roster changes at the start of the year. Despite not making SI last year, this org was determined to make amends. But they always seem to hit a roadblock somewhere along the way. Seeing as they did not attend Sao Paulo, we kick off in Stage 1. After dropping long-time players Alems and Renshiro, BDS signed both Users and Solotov from the old M&M gaming roster. At the time, I was a little bit skeptical about this change, not because of Users and Solotov, they are great players worthy of a spot at BDS, but for it to come at the cost of Alems and Renshiro was a bit of a point of contention for me coming into Stage 1 of Europe. You know something? It worked right out of the gate, with a new blood slotting into BDS's system incredibly well and putting those fears to bed. And that translated into first place in Stage 1 for Europe, despite a bit of a scare in the grand final when Into the Breach took a map off them. Come Manchester, BDS looked poised to sweep through Phase 2 of the major. But they got off to a pretty bad start, with losses to Fury in the first round and PSG Talon in an upset loss in round 3. But BDS was able to rally and eliminate Kagosaka and Team Bliss in their elimination matches to qualify into the playoff bracket. Their quarterfinals opponents were fellow EU org Team Secret. BDS beat them 2-0. Semis had them matched up against Dark Zero. BDS beat them 2-0. Grand final opponents were the surprise packet of Beast Coast. BDS lost 2-3 in a nail-biter. If 1 or 2 more rounds went the way of the French team, they would have won Manchester. They stick with the same formula going into the EWC, and they essentially had a field day from groups to the grand final, where they beat the new W7M roster 3-0. Now, if you look back at the last 3 years of Gamers 8 and the Esports World Cup, you'll notice that BDS has won it all 3 years in a row. But that somehow has not translated into success in official Blast LAN tournaments. At least not for 2024. Suspicious. BDS returned from Saudi Arabia with momentum and a point to prove that they are not just a one-trick pony. And they backed it up. Stage 2 of the Europe League was almost a carbon copy of Stage 1. First place in the regular season and taking the first seed going into Montreal after dropping a map to Team Secret in the grand final. Thankfully, BDS had a more convincing path through Phase 2 of Montreal, dropping only 1 game to W7M in the early rounds. They got matched up against Secret in the quarterfinals again, and took them down again, despite Secret's new recruit in Virtue. They get matched up against Space Clan in the semifinals and absolutely schooled them 2-0. They make it to the Montreal Major Grand Final. They're the odds-on favorite to win once again, and their opponents are yet another surprise packet that no one expected would make it as far as they did. So, did W7M make amends for their close loss in Manchester to Beast Coast? No. They lost to W7M 3-1. It was so close to winning a major for the second time this year, and they bottled it. Again. This doesn't exactly do their attempts to prove that they're more than Saudi merchants any favors, now does it? BDS are beginning to look like the European version of FaZe Clan. Fantastic domestically, but not quite good enough to take that final step towards a major trophy. They get within touching distance of a major trophy twice, and they get shown up twice by a bunch of upstarts that by all accounts had no right to be there. If they lost to someone like Dark Zero or Team Liquid in the grand finals, then I don't think we would be judging them as harshly as we are. Despite that, I still feel that BDS is the best team at SI from Europe. Users and Solotov have slotted into the system that Leakafak, Brede, and Shaika have all built into the team. If these guys somehow don't make the main stage, then I will be both very surprised and very disappointed in them. Team Secret had a massive glow-up in the 2024 season after years of struggling in the bottom of Europe. Their brief cameo in SI23 seemed to spark some belief in the org, but they were still just outside relevancy throughout that season, with mid-table rankings at both stages of Europe. 2024 was when they really turned on the afterburners, because holy shit, With Miracle on the roster, Team Secret started off their 2024 campaign with 3rd place in Europe, beating the Wolves 2-1 and booking their tickets to Manchester, although that last map did go to overtime. Nevertheless, Secret went to their first major since Raleigh back in 2019, if you don't count their appearance at SI23. And they continued to ride that momentum in Manchester, making it all the way to the playoffs after beating FaZe Clan, Dark Zero, and Team Bliss in that order in Phase 2 of the major. They made it out of groups alongside Furia with a 3-0 win record. Well done, Secret! They would ultimately lose to BDS in the quarterfinals, but that result was enough for the rest of Europe to stand up and take notice, especially after the transfer window opened up and they swapped out Miracle for Virtue after the latter got dropped from G2, making the roster Savage, Doom, Adrian, Virtue, and Grubby. And if nothing else, that only made Secret all the more formidable in the server, making it all the way to the grand final of Europe Stage 2. Yes, they would lose to BDS in the grand final, but by that point it didn't matter. They qualified for Montreal and effectively confirmed their spot at SI25. They did have a bit of a tougher time in groups, dropping a seeding match to Team Falcons in round 2 of Phase 2, but they were still able to make the playoffs for their second major in a row. Secret would meet BDS in the quarters once again, and this time they get trounced 2-0. Even so, that level of consistency is pretty damn good. I still don't think that's going to be enough. Do not get me wrong, Secret have been one of the surprise packets of 2024. Top 3 in both stages of Europe, top 8 at both majors. That's some pretty damn good results compared to last year when they were just outside people's notice. I still don't think they're World Championship material, and that's compared to the rest of the top players at SI. To me, they feel a little too inconsistent at the moment. They'll still make it out of their group and put on a decent showing in the playoffs. But I feel that main stage is just out of reach of Secret, for the moment. And the last team from Europe to qualify for SI via global standings points, the all-Russian Virtus.pro. The acquisition of the former Team Empire core has gone down a storm for this org, who now find themselves in a similar position to Empire back in the day, before the mass exodus. Now, this is where things begin to get a little interesting for VP, but I don't know whether that's a good thing or not. Starting with SI 2024, VP were the best non-Brazilian team at the event with 3rd place. First place in the group of death despite tying with the eventual world champions on points, sent NIP down to the lower bracket with ease, put Dark Zero's upper bracket run to bed in nail-biting fashion on Skyscraper, but then got sent down to the lower bracket by FaZe Clan and were 1 round away from the org's first ever SI Grand Final. What a turnaround of form for these guys. They went into Stage 1 of the Europe League with a lot of momentum following their SI results, but they got completely humiliated with 8th place overall. They were not able to make playoffs at all, and they couldn't redeem themselves during the qualified gauntlet for Manchester when they got eliminated from the LCQ by ENCE in the quarterfinals. From 3rd place in the world to this, in the span of 3 months, clearly something wasn't working. However, as is the case with VP, they stuck together and came back stronger for Stage 2 of Europe, just barely scraping into the playoffs with 6th place in the regular stage, beat their old rivals in G2 in the quarters, lost to Team Secret in the semis, and would bounce back against the Wolves and win the 3rd place match to book their tickets to Manchester. Talk about a comeback. Come the Swiss phase of Montreal, Virtus.pro were never in any real danger of being eliminated with a 2-1 record going into their first promotion match against BDS. But despite both maps going in overtime, VP were not able to topple the French. But they still had one more shot of making the playoffs against the Chiefs, who were looking very shaky after they let Team Falcons walk all over them in their promotion match. And it was ultimately a cakewalk for the Russians, with the Aussies winning only 2 rounds out of 16. Yes, it was a 7-0 and 7-2 in favor of Virtus.pro. And yes, it was painful for me to watch. It was also here that VP broke the hearts of OS fans even more when they were among 2 teams that knocked Gaming Gladiators out of the top 16. That was painful. The quarterfinal draw saw VP get matched up against Team Falcons, which made for a very intriguing storyline. The old guard versus the young guns, Joystick versus Robby, who would ultimately come out on top. In the end, experience won out over exuberance, with VP clinching it in 2 very, very close maps. If that wasn't vindication that the old mules can still kick, I don't know what is. They would ultimately get sent home in the semis by W7M, but I would still take that result for VP as a sign for things to come at SI. Joystick, Dan, Shepard, and Always have managed to find themselves in the same position they were back on Empire, near the top of the rankings in Europe and feared for their structure and rigorous discipline in the server. But for Pasha, this is something relatively new for him. He's been at VP ever since they picked up the Force roster, sticking with them through every iteration of the roster. And ever since the Empire Corps made the transition to VP, Pasha seems to have been the missing puzzle piece that they needed to get back into the conversation again. I reckon this 5-stack of Hungry Russians are capable of making it incredibly deep in the playoff bracket. Hell, I go so far as to say they make the main stage again. And now for something a little different, as we welcome Team Falcons back to the 6th Invitational. Their sophomore year in Siege is really playing dividends, despite a rocky stage in one in MENA. And that's on the back of one very exciting prospect, but I'll get there in a second. SI last year was actually not too bad for the Falcons, given it was their first ever SI, and they were playing with 2 stand-ins on day 1. 4th place out of their group, their safety only secured on their final match against Scars, but got matched up against Team Liquid in their only match in the playoffs, and were soundly beaten. Though keep in mind that Twister was on loan from Secret during SI, and Falcons was spawning an almost completely different roster to the one going to Boston 12 months later. So during the transfer window, the Saudis part ways with Valentino and Joker619, Hasham comes over from GK Esports, and Eden joins the team as the number 2 to Mad Skills. However, Stage 1 was not overly successful for the Falcons, with only 5th place. Now, it is worth pointing out that MENA was the only region that only had a round-robin phase in their domestic league. The Oceanic League was also round-robin only for 2023, but they added a playoff phase for 2024. So maybe it was not entirely indicative of what the Falcons could do. Come the mid-year transfer window, Falcons picks up guards, Dovahkiin, and an exceptionally talented Italian gunner in Robby. This kid spent several months in EUT2 on Team 86 before being picked up by the Falcons, and he's been nothing short of a sensation. With Robby on the roster, Falcons took 1st place in Stage 1 of MENA, going undefeated throughout the entire stage and earning their spot in Montreal. Starting in Phase 1 of a major was never going to be an easy job, especially for a newer region that's still finding their footing in the big leagues. But Falcons were able to do something that GK struggled to do in Manchester, and that was capitalize on their domestic momentum. The Saudi Arabian team blitzed through the upper bracket of play-ins in 2 series against Alpha Team and the Chiefs. And that would not be the only time they faced the Aussies too. Come Phase 2, they would exceed expectations again with wins against Dark Zero and Team Secret, sending them up to the 2-0 bracket. After a loss against FaZe Clan, they once again faced the Chiefs in a promotion match. And the result was almost a carbon copy of their play-in match. Coming up against Virtus.pro in the quarters was always going to be a daunting task, but they still showed some promise and fight. Despite that, they still fell to the Bears in 2 maps, ending their Montreal campaign. I do have to bring something up. In previous videos, I have taken the mickey out of GK Esports for having more than 5 players on their active roster. Well, Falcons have kind of done the same thing here, only they have 8. Yep, you heard right. 8 active players on their books. Sweet Jesus. I suspect it's a similar tactic to what Elevate used to do a few years ago, when they had 1 or 2 extra subs just in case one of their starting 5 was not able to play for whatever reason. In any case, Falcons' starting 5 consists of J-Lad, Hasham, Dov, Guards, and Robby, which is the same 5 that took them to the quarterfinals in Montreal, which I like from these guys. They keep being consistent across events to allow a little more cohesion. The Falcons bring a playstyle that I refer to as controlled chaos. They get in quick, they look for early gunfights, and they aim to capitalize on their opponents scrambling to build an advantage. But it is not just reckless aggression. They have shown that they can adapt in between rounds as well. If they bring that same manic playstyle that saw them make it to playoffs in Montreal, then I reckon the Falcons are a chance of going deep into the upper bracket. However, I do not believe that they're world title contenders. They're a bit too raw for me. They'll still be an entertaining watch in Boston for sure, but I think a main stage appearance is one barricade too many. And last but not least, the team that qualified through the EU and MENA LCQ, G2. Oh, come on. Do you honestly think I'd make the same gag twice? That would be too easy. even if G2 are making themselves look like an utter joke. It's hard to believe that this is the same org that won their second hammer back in 2023. But we have to face facts. And now, we have to break them down. Oh, this will be a riot. Their lone highlight for the year was 4th place at Invite last year, losing to the eventual world champions in W7M. Undefeated in their group, got sent down to the lower bracket by FaZe Clan, and sent Team Liquid, Team Bliss, and Dark Zero home in that order. Their run at Sao Paulo was enough to remind us that these were the 2023 world champions for a reason. That respect was earned. But after SI, things would come crashing down. Oh boy, did they crash. 5th place in Stage 1 of Europe after just barely scraping into the playoff bracket. Got sent down to the LCQ seeding match by ITB, and beat Fnatic to get a better seeding placement in the LCQ. It's at this point where G2 pull a leaf from Kag Osaka's playbook, and schooled everyone in that bracket. Wild, the forgotten days. Ents, didn't matter. G2 were Manchester bound. And if SI was their high point, then the UK was their low point, as they were eliminated during the play-ins, in straight sets, by Team Liquid and FearX. Ouch! So, come the mid-year transfer window, G2 decide to shake up the roster. How do they do that? By dropping their analyst in Titan, Benjamaster, and Virtue. Thankfully, those guys all found homes in Stage 2 and beyond, with Virtue staying in Europe with Team Secret, Benja flying across the pond to join SSG, and Titan becoming the new head coach for what would become Gaming Gladiators. But it's their new pickups that raise even more questions. Sure, Blast has become quite the journeyman and is a solid player in his own right. But shipping Laura over from Brazil? I was more than a little skeptical. And it turned out my worries were justified. 5th place in Stage 2 of Europe again, despite a better result in the regular season. Lost to VP in the quarters, and were only a few rounds away from losing to Wild in the 5th place match. But their LCQ buff comes into play once again, and they get 1st place. Once again, beating Ents in the grand final. Now, to their credit, they did make it out of play-ins this time, but got utterly schooled in Swiss, with losses to Team Liquid, Scars, and Sonics. Yeah, G2 lost to Sonics in Phase 2. That's embarrassing! What's more, that result meant that they would not qualify for Boston on points as they were well outside the top 16. But G2 had one last chance to qualify for Boston through the EU and MENA qualifier gauntlet. And it was hardly a contest for them, beating Mako Esports and Asparagus twice to qualify for the org's 6th Invitational. Like with CAG, G2 have qualified for every marquee tournament this season through the LCQ. But unlike CAG, who struggle at the international level, G2 have serious problems at the moment if they have to rely on an LCQ bracket if they want to compete at an international level. Alamal, Doki, Yuno, Blaz, and Laura all need to show us that the LCQ run was not a fluke, especially with Cameraman being signed as the new assistant coach. The alarm bells are ringing for G2, and it's on them to silence their critics. Europe, in my opinion, doesn't look as strong collectively when you compare them to, say, Brazil, but individually have some real chances to lift the hammer. BDS are my favourites from EU to win it, so long as they can get over their grand final curse. I swear to God, if they lose another grand final for this season, I'm gonna lose my shit. Team Secret and Virtus.pro, I feel like can make a case for a main stage appearance at the very least. VP especially. But I don't know if either of them have what it takes to challenge for the hammer. I guess if I had to choose one, I'd lean more towards the Russians because of their hot streak in Stage 2 and Montreal. Team Falcons, I feel like, will put on a good show and make a good run in the lower bracket, but their collective inexperience at the top flight of seeds compared to the rest of the world will be a factor going against them in the World Championship. And G2, I honestly don't know what to expect from them going into SI. I could see them getting knocked down in groups, or even winning their 3rd hammer if they somehow get their shit together. I've got no idea. And with that, we've reached the end of this breakdown series. Do you think anyone from Europe or MENA has a chance at SI this year? Let me know in the comments below. This was the most ambitious set of videos I've created in my short career on YouTube. If you stuck with me to the very end, then I cannot thank you enough. This has been a long and grueling endeavor, but if you enjoyed it, then it was worth it. If you want to see more content like this in the future, feel free to subscribe to this channel. I have some ideas about videos I want to make for the coming year outside of T1 news and analysis, so keep your eyes out on those over the next few months. Until next time, operators, this is Resident Silverwolf, signing out.